I have the opportunity and the benefit of introducing our next talk and our last talk before lunch. Brent, again, we are taking time back during lunch, so you don't need to cut your time short at all. We've given everybody an hour for lunch, which an hour to walk to your kitchen is probably more than enough time. So we'll take back some of that time during lunch. So please consume your time as appropriate. So I've had the opportunity to work with Brent for a couple of years now. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite people that kind of sits in a couple of different worlds from a lawyer. When I seen him register for one of our most advanced ICS courses, I had some alarm bells going off, but he was absolutely one of the most capable students in the classroom and really did some great work. Continued to work with Brent over the time since he was a student, and again, kind of this ability to look at very, very deep technical OT and industrial control system language and in standards and regulation, in contracts. Just an unbelievably unique skill set, kind of spanning both of those worlds. Brent is the founder of Extensible Security. He started his career at a law firm where his, kind of clients had him doing asset management across the Gulf Coast. In the chemical sector specifically, doing a lot of work with IT and OT security and legal, as well as tax. So again, just kind of this mix of unbelievable skill sets. He's going to talk to us today about mergers and acquisitions. And I had talked about this a little bit at the kickoff this morning, and Ron had mentioned it as well. Just kind of the state we're in with a lot of mergers and acquisitions occurring from entities to vendors to OEMs, and kind of the result of that where regardless of kind of the program you were running and managing at your organization, and as proud as you were of it, now you have this kind of new component added that you need to go learn and understand, and you may actively be looking into kind of immature organizations that have been adopted into yours, that you need to kind of merge these two programs and the risks that are associated with it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brent, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. And as always, I have no idea how to follow up with your introductions. They're very complimentary. So as Tim said, this is getting mergers and acquisitions and putting it into an ICS cybersecurity perspective. A lot of the focus on M&A, where a lot of people think about it, is from just straight up IT security, just because that's where a lot of the alarm bells go off today. And so the idea is, hopefully after this talk, you can go back to your organization and try and get more effective processes in place to get ICS security implemented, and all the questions and answers and this entire crapshoot that is M&A, get ICS security in as part of that process. So a little bit of my biography. Yes, I'm an attorney. From a cybersecurity perspective, I really started getting into it in undergrad, and then Wi-Fi Pineapple, Hack5, putting backtrack on ARM processors. I had the benefit of being one of the people donating to Michael Osmond's Kickstarter for both HackRF and Ubertooth. So messing around with those while I was in law school was fun. A lot of the cybersecurity dropped off my second year of law school, because sitting at the back of the room, messing around on RF with various people's Bluetooth mice and on other people's networks negatively impacted my grades in a way that wasn't beneficial or conducive to job searching later on. But then after I left the law firm and went in-house in the chemical industry, I picked up cybersecurity because I became responsible for cybersecurity. And then around this time, last year, I left to do my own thing, and Extensible Security was born. So just the standard attorney disclaimer: not giving legal advice. Talk about everything here legal with your attorneys before doing anything. So I felt like it was a really good idea to kind of discuss what to expect. M&A is an incredibly broad topic. So many people spend their entire careers in M&A doing various subsets of M&A that you can't really cover it in a 30-minute or even 1-hour presentation. If you look at business school or any grad school programs, there's numerous classes that talk about M&A. And so trying to distill it into 30 minutes just isn't going to work out as well. But because it's a broad topic, I'm going to try and leave time at the end for questions. And again, that hallway chat, I'll be in it as long as I can today. This talk is not about divisive reorgs, i.e. spinning assets into a new entity. Yes, that happens. Yes, large companies form various subsidiaries and you're breaking up your IT and cybersecurity departments. This talk isn't about that. This is really about onboarding new organizations. Again, this is also from the perspective of the acquirer, not the target. That said, if you are the target, you do have takeaways from this because you should be thinking about, hey, people may be asking me questions about this. I need to have the answers prepped so that I don't negatively impact the value of my company when they're talking price. Also, Wheaton's Law, I'm trying to be politically correct because people may be sitting around their children, but don't be that guy if you're the target. I realize your job may be questionable, but don't be that guy. Also, even though you're getting all this information together and prepping for, hey, I'm probably going to need to turn this over and explain everything that's good and everything that's bad about OT cybersecurity, don't answer questions that aren't asked. Justin sometimes talks about a resume generating event. This can be a resume generating event because you're oversharing, the deal may fall through, and now you've just impacted the price of the deal that left. This isn't going to be a compliance talk. Compliance exists. Again, but interestingly enough, related to OT cybersecurity in oil and gas, there's not a whole lot of government compliance from even though it's stated that there is, there just kind of isn't. My examples are going to be from chemical plants. I do have a little bit of experience related to upstream, but it's primarily downstream. And if you're technical, obviously this sounds like a business-focused talk. The issue is that a lot of times the negotiators and the decision makers don't actually get the technical information they need to effectively negotiate price in M&A. And then those same decision makers are going to be dealing with restructuring what do the business units look like post-acquisition. If they aren't getting your technical information related to the price, they're also not getting your technical information related to how you're going to structure the company afterward. So that can be seriously problematic for your life post-acquisition. So I know a lot of people here may not understand or have a lot of involvement in the M&A process. It's so broad, there's a lot of stages that I'm not talking about because they're not really important to us. What you should take away is if other people discuss M&A, they're probably going to be talking about some steps that you're not going to hear about here. Just they're not important for the purposes of this talk. You can move on. Where we really should start getting involved is in the due diligence phase. Due diligence is, okay, our financial team has come up with these massive spreadsheets. They've estimated, here's what the benefits are going to be. Here are all the synergies. Here's the additional value that's going to come from our assets. Is this real? The other part of due diligence is the, okay, what's bad? Where we like to say, where are the bodies buried? In order to find all the bodies, everyone uses, I call it a checklist. Other people call it playbooks. People have all sorts of terms for this, but law firms, accounting firms, regardless of what you call it, everyone uses them. It's the only way to get through the massive process of due diligence without making sure that you didn't forget something. This is really where you want to focus a lot of your time and effort, because other people are going to take the information that you've given during the you've made sure that you understood during the due diligence phase, and they're going to turn that into the negotiation and structuring decisions that come later. This isn't these aren't really steps. I tried not to call them steps. I try to call them stages, because due diligence, negotiation, structuring, and transition onboarding, all three kind of overlap with one another in a lot of deals. Negotiation and structuring is what a lot of people think of when they think of M&A. It's the, hey, we have executives, they're talking to our attorneys are talking to the target's attorneys, and then they're negotiating price. And then your executives are coming back and saying, oh, well, if we get a lower price, maybe we could structure it this way. We're going to get some additional synergies there. Maybe the liabilities aren't as bad as we thought. This is what a lot of people think of. Then the transition and onboarding, I can't really spend a whole lot of time here because there's so many different ways to do it. I mean, there's transition services agreements, there's outsourcing, there's having their team manage it, there's you managing assets that you've just acquired. There's all sorts of ways to do it. And that's kind of a whole topic in and of itself. The big thing here is to consider insider threats. You know, hey, I feel like I'm going to get a pink slip, so I may do bad things. And then outsider threats that are capitalizing on the chaos. So why should you actually care about M&A? A good example of this, not related to cybersecurity, was a venture capital company came in to buy a chemical plant in the Houston area, and their due diligence team came in and looked at accounting, they looked at compliance, they looked at SOX, they looked at controls management, they looked at processes and procedures, but they never looked at the actual assets. And so you had a bunch of tanks and a bunch of valves and all sorts of reactors that were approaching or past end of life and needed maintenance or complete replacement, and they had no idea. And so they paid a lot of money for this plant, but then after they acquired it, they realized, oh, we're going to have to sink a lot more capital into this, and it dramatically impacted the number of employees that they kept post-acquisition. Getting this actionable read on security does take additional resources up front, but it's going to pay off in the long run, because it's going to be way easier post-acquisition. And then again, post-acquisition, if they don't know that there's security issues, then they haven't planned for it when they're talking price. And so they're going to pay extra money, then all of a sudden, oops, we need to sink a lot of capital in, and it's going to come out of your budget afterward. So Dragos and Deloitte had a webinar on its strategic cybersecurity roadmap. I'm using that as the term. There's not necessarily a technical term for this right now, but this is really the best approach, especially for M&A. The key points here are having asset types and then a prioritized list of classifications for these asset types based on government regulation, based on profitability, based on whatever your executives agree to, and then having agreed controls. So controls that both your executives have agreed on from a cost perspective, and controls that the people responsible for operational integrity, whether it's your production manager or a plant manager, they've already agreed to and that they know work. Google that webinar. You should really be watching it. I know a lot of people use these frameworks, 62443 and any number of other frameworks for M&A. The problem with that, you'll see the problems more later, but that's going to dramatically increase the amount of effort down the road, and you're not going to have a very clear picture of what you're acquiring from the get-go. What you should also be doing is this roadmap really needs to be consequence-driven. Your EHS team has already done this, because process safety management with OSHA, risk management plans with the EPA, HAZOPs, they're all consequence-driven. And as Sergio was talking about, you can get attorneys and you can get executives to listen. If this has happened other places, it's a far more convincing argument than, oh, well, this subsection of 62443, they don't comply with that. Okay, well, an attorney's not going to actually use that from a negotiation standpoint. So preparation. What you should really be looking at is getting that roadmap, get the asset types like the production, pipeline, plant in place. These are pretty clearly delineated. Then have agreed on classes and agreed on controls. Those all need to go into the checklist. So there's a ton of information flying around in M&A. And if you think that SANS courses are like drinking from a fire hose, Try M&A, where you're talking about tons and tons of talking points. I mean, sometimes M&A due diligence file sites turn into 10 or more terabytes of information, and just, I mean, these aren't videos, these are documents with 10 terabytes that people are going through. There's so much information that your decision makers and your executives are so unlikely to pay any attention to anything that you've said unless it's on that checklist. Everything you say will just go against a wall, even though you're completely right and all the technical information that you've given is entirely accurate and relevant. It's like you're talking to a brick wall because it's not on the checklist. They may hear it, they may even respond to it, but they're not going to absorb it, and they're definitely not going to plan anything based off of it because it's not on this checklist. And I know it sounds crazy, it's just there's too many decision points that go into M&A for extraneous information that you may have heard that isn't included on the checklist. So you really need to get everything that you care about, hardware, software, bombs, structure, and everything onto that checklist. So once you get into the actual due diligence portion, the answer is distrust and verify. Your target has a lot of reasons to mislead you. Remember the plant I was talking about, they weren't necessarily misleading, the question wasn't asked, so they didn't talk about whether or not most of their assets were end of life. You should be having people go on site just like this venture capital company did. Someone from your team needs to go too. If you hear Rob talk about how to do a OT SOC, he talks about your level 3 person should be the person who's actually an operations person who knows cybersecurity enough. They know exactly how things should work and exactly how things should run. That's the person that you want going there. That said, in some IP heavy M&A, those operators, there may be a lot of issues related to them going on site. Work through this as best you can, but sometimes you just can't do it. Where this comes up is, for example, someone has a nifty chemical or refinery process that creates a ton of value. Well, no one wants an operator on site sitting down near a keyboard to actually see what's going on, because then they may take it back with them. Even if you are able to have that person go on site, there's a huge risk. Your internal legal may not actually let them go back to work, because now they have an understanding of those processes. And so even if you've come up with those processes internally, there's going to be an argument that you stole IP if the deal fell through. So what this is a picture of is a cabinet that was just sitting off in a back room, and it's for manufacturing, basically drumming chemicals. And so it was put into place in the late 2000s, and no one had really touched it since. When you remember Ron talking about the assets that have been sitting there that are kind of zombies, this is kind of one of those zombies. If you don't have someone go on site, then everyone who's doing due diligence is going to say, okay, it's a manufacturing line, it works, yay. The problem is this was actually running OpenSuite from around 2009, and the entire OS was in German. So when Ron was talking about the number of kernel vulnerabilities in some of the RTUs that he looked at, think about kernel vulnerabilities in Linux from 2009 until 2018, and that's what this cabinet looked like. So this got air gapped, but you're not going to have any idea if you don't have someone on site during due diligence looking at all this. This is going to be one of those, oh my God, we just acquired this and it's online and there's all these vulnerabilities. We have to do something about this ASAP. It's way better to avoid that fire drill and know about this up front so that you can plan for it, and more importantly, get the budget for it, because planning and budget always go hand in hand. So alongside that budget, you're going to need to be estimating the cost to implement these controls in order to both negotiate price, which is kind of how you pay for this extra upfront effort, and from a hey, we need to get this plan approved, we need to get this budget approved, here are the critical controls that need to be implemented ASAP if this deal actually happens. So like Sergio was talking about, it's really important here to do consequence-driven instead of just a framework, because if you can go to the attorneys and you can go to the executives and give this consequence-driven analysis, then they'll actually listen. What you're really looking for here is, hey, is your attorney say, well, you don't have these controls in place. There's a threat actor called Fuzzy Snuggly Duck that's been doing X in this industry, and without these controls, you have no idea whether they're in your systems or not. The goal is for their attorneys to go back to their executives and their executives to go back to their technical team and say, do we know if Fuzzy Snuggly Duck's actively exploiting issues in our systems? Because then they're thinking about it and they've realized, oh, there's an issue. And just as importantly, your executives are thinking about it. They've realized, oh, there's a valid issue that they need to account for from a budget perspective and from a resourcing perspective down the road. So in the best case scenario, you're going to be looking at having 80%, give or take, project plan for which controls you want to implement at the end of negotiation and structuring. From a contract signing and deal perspective, negotiation and structuring, it normally happens part of the way through here. There's a tremendous number of deals that are signed where companies effectively get the green light to start integrating things pending various third parties approving it. So when you hear about these companies that are, oh, we waited 6 months for DOJ to approve it and the Department of Justice said that this is going to be a monopoly, so they didn't approve it, and it now cost us X millions of dollars to unwind all the integrations we've done. It sucks, but that's kind of the cost to play the game in a lot of ways. Because you are going to get the green light during some of the negotiation, you're probably going to get a green light to start integrating during some of the negotiation and structuring phases, but before the deal is final, before it's gotten full approval, you need to have this project plan in place as soon as possible so that you're not waiting for regulatory approval and finding out that you have a bunch of incredibly vulnerable devices sitting on your network that have remote access from God knows where. That's not a fun place to be. The way that you normally end up there is you get this general question phone call from someone higher up in the company that says, hey, if we were to bring a bunch of production assets or a plant online, what exactly would be needed? How much do you think it would cost for us to see how secure it is and really secure it in a way that we shouldn't have to worry? We need to bring it up to our standards in case it's not. If the deal's not public, that's a really bad sign that you're about to get hit hard and heavy. And really my first question is, so this is operational, right? Yes, it's operational. We're keeping all of their security people, right? Yes, we're keeping all their security people and all their operations people. Great. It's a lot worse if you're having to take over soon. That said, keep calm, because overreacting in this can cause a lot of interesting results. If it's really late in the deal, they may have already defined out, your finance team's big spreadsheet says, here are the cost synergies, here's how much budget we have, here's where the budget's allocated. They may not have any remaining capital to secure this in the way it needs to be. So they may say, oh, well, we're just going to outsource this to a company I've never heard of that's the lowest bidder because there was the lowest bidder for all the issues that you raised. Really try and you have to present this carefully because tensions run high. There's this thing called deal fever. It's a thing where people, they just really want to close the deal. And so they make really bad decisions because they want the deal to be done because they spent the last X number of months of their lives working on it and they just want it to be over. And so saying, oh, well, yeah, I know of this company because I'm a VP of finance and I'm going to outsource it to them because that fits into our budget. That's a really bad idea. Then you move into transition and onboarding. I'm not really going to go into detail on this because there's so many different variables that you can get into all sorts of this dives down rabbit holes very quickly. You have transition service agreements, you have outsourcing, you have they're going to manage it and we're going to manage it. There's, oh, well, how do we combine the SOX? There's so many ways that people handle this that it's not necessarily worth time for the purposes of this presentation. You should be, again, on the lookout for both internal and outsider threats. From an internal perspective, you have a lot of people that are going to be doing things that you may not have seen before. That doesn't mean that they're bad. That just means that they haven't been properly trained in the way that your organization runs things. That said, it could be an outsider that's a malicious threat actor who's trying to capitalize on all the chaos. So you're going to have to spend a little bit more time digging into everything that's going on because you're just not used to seeing it. And so the way you should look at transition and onboarding from a roadmap and for the purposes of this talk is your project plan is either working or you don't have one or it's not working. If it's the first group, great, your project plan is working, you're getting effective ICS security, cool. If your project plan didn't work or there were a lot of last minute changes, which happen all the time, you're in a different boat. And if your project plan didn't work, it's kind of like if you don't get answers on the checklist, you need to be answers back on certain questions for your checklist. Just assume the worst. Sometimes the checklist will come back as everything we have is air gapped. I'm sure people here have heard that once or twice. That's cool. Not y'all know how that works. If you do see someone who's really immature with a lot of vulnerabilities, don't panic because they have been operational and your company does want to buy them. That's not saying they haven't been operational with vulnerabilities. That's just saying they probably haven't gone down due to cybersecurity or else someone would know about it, hopefully. And I mean, there's always if you don't ask during due diligence, they don't have to tell you. So again, make sure that that's on your due diligence checklist. If they are immature, don't triage. You're going to get overwhelmed with vulnerabilities. You're going to get overwhelmed with the controls that need to be put in place. The most important thing is to make sure that your executives and your operations, people responsible for operational integrity, they all agree, here are the controls that we've approved. Here's how we're classifying assets so that way these controls are approved for going into these different asset classes. If you go in and you immediately triage and you find a whole host of issues, then all of a sudden these critical controls that need to be put in place and all across half of what you've just acquired from your target, there's going to be a discussion about whether or not you have the budget for it. If you get a tacit agreement on roadmap and which controls should be put in place before you even do the triage, then it's way easier to have that discussion on, oh my God, we have to put in all these controls, even though you don't have the budget for it, because they've already agreed that these controls are incredibly important. You need to know what you have before you start. Obviously, that's kind of a basic lesson from 410, 515, every other ICS course on the planet. That said, don't just think about it from I'm going to change firewall settings, I'm going to redo the architecture, I'm going to all of a sudden start segregating my networks, whether physically or virtual, logical separation. I'm also talking about the processes. So if you think back to that cabinet that got air gapped, the reason why that needed to be, the purported reason why that needed to be connected to the network was so that it could send data up to the historian, which then sent data to the ERP server, so that way the ERP system would know what was produced, when it was produced, the quantity in each drum, that sort of thing. The process, technically, and that's right, like that, the systems were doing that. But what was funny was at that site, they actually also had the operators with handheld with touchpads. and they were reporting in real time the production. So you have this historian talking to the ERP server saying, hey, we produced this many drums and here's how many pounds were in each drum. But you also have the operators who are on their touchpads saying, here's how many drums we produced. So you have this incredibly vulnerable device that's on the network. Yes, it's working as intended. No, it's not needed. So by knowing the processes and procedures before you start throwing down all these edicts, then you're able to make rational decisions that can shave off some time. Think about if you were to have to go back to the original integrator of that cabinet or bring on a new integrator who's going to have to learn everything about that cabinet because there was no documentation on it. Think about the amount of time and the amount of budget that would have eaten up. You're able to really shave off a lot of unnecessary time and a lot of unnecessary budget if you know exactly what's happening and why before you start changing anything. Again, it may be really scary. Keep calm. There's no reason to panic here, because panic can just be very problematic later. And if you panic, you're more likely to throw down some edicts that are unnecessary. And think of this as relationship building as well. If you go in and say, oh my God, you're running this wrong, this is the first time that you've probably had the opportunity to talk to a lot of these people. And your statement is going to be, you've been doing it wrong for the last decade. That's probably not the best way to get started off on the right foot with someone that you're going to be needing to convince to implement your controls in the future. If you have the approval to do a full vulnerability assessment, awesome. Like, go for it. It's expensive, but hey, maybe you have a budget for it. If you don't, start with the architecture review, and then I'm not going to try and regurgitate Austin Scott's webinar, but Austin Scott's webinar is golden for this. It's I forgot to include it on this, but one other really important piece of information that is very useful is I can't remember which course it is, but it's the one, and it's who the instructor is, but it's the course on PowerShell for Windows security. Every single one of those PowerShell scripts that he uses in the course is on GitHub. Those are gold for really getting through and knowing. If you're like me and you're not really comfortable with PowerShell all the time, I'm not a PowerShell guru. I can make it work, but I am not the best coder at all. So those PowerShell scripts really help.